Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle!
The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
All creatures great and small! De la Vega! ¡No me pongo de pie! ¡De rodillas!
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder at Heart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Gold Cup seriously.
This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest. Welcome to yet another episode of Nos Arietes on the Sounder at Heart podcast network. I am Jeremiah Shan, joined again, second time this week, by Niko Moreno. We're going to do another episode of what we learned this week because the Sounders keep dropping news. We keep learning new things. The latest is they are going, we are, in full disclosure, we are recording this before the Paul Rothrock signing has been announced, but we now feel very secure in reporting that is happening. Niko, just want to say good job reporting this one out. This has been an interesting one to follow.
Thanks, Jeremiah. It's been one that I definitely put a lot of resources into, and I'm glad that I did. You know, he might not be your the Paul Rothrock being re-signed might not be your St. Clair to Miami or anything of that degree nationally, but I feel like to the response of the people that I got over this breaking news, I mean, it was pretty cool. It talks about the community around the Sounders, and so yes, I'm very happy that we were able to get ahead of it. That with your lead, we were able to talk about it. Now we're able to talk about the Dotson thing. I feel like we've done a lot of work sporadically here and there, making sure that we keep everybody updated. So yeah, man, I appreciate it. And it's definitely a good one to break for the people.
Yeah. So Paul Rothrock it's been quite an interesting saga to follow. We have touched on it a few times, and I'll tell you, everything I was hearing, I think everything you were hearing as well, up until maybe a week or so ago, was that it looked like Rothrock had played his last game for the Sounders, at least for the time being. And he was going to test free agency. And the expectation, I think, inside the organization, or at least with some people inside the organization, was if he tests free agency, he's going to get offers. And the question will be whether or not those offers would rise enough to the point that it would justify him leaving Seattle. And the Sounders were pretty secure in that they had made a fair offer to him, and that they weren't really, they offered him what they felt like they could afford to offer him in the salary cap. They offered what they thought he was worth. And then once he goes out into the market and sees what else is out there, I guess there was some, I think this is maybe where there was a disagreement a little bit internally. I think some people in the organization thought he's going to leave, whereas there were some other people, and I think maybe even Craig Weibel was among these people, who thought were a little more confident that he might come back. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly fair to say. Sometimes you make an assessment to evaluate a player and you compare it league wide, and you as a club have the confidence that that evaluation holds up and that you might even be giving the player a little more than the average team would give him because of the history, because of everything that Paul Rothrock represents, for everything that he was able to do for the Sounders last season. And I think that's what happened. They said, and we've talked about Craig Weibel being a pretty straightforward guy. He at the negotiating table was very likely telling Paul, this is what it is. And you go ahead and test the market, see what's out there. And if you feel like there's a better option, then we'd be, happy to see you go somewhere else. But if you don't, the door is open. And I feel like that's exactly the situation. Even when I was talking and reporting that San Jose was in advanced conversations, and I was very careful with that term because, negotiations begin with throwing formal offers, but it was definitely something along the lines of advanced serious interest for the player saying, look, this is exactly what we'd be able to offer you. And at the end of the day, what Seattle was likely offering Paul Rothrock and what he was getting out in the market was either at the same value or a little less, or not enough for him to move away from Seattle, move away from a situation where he has guaranteed minutes, where he has the trust of a Brian Smetzer who is clearly going to use him consistently, where your entire childhood and local nativeness makes you a lot more interesting in the daily paper or in the news cycle than it would for a San Jose or a Nashville or certainly an LA Galaxy, some of the teams that were interested in him at one point. So all in all, we know that the Sounders are a team that still a protagonist in this league that is playing for big titles. And I'm sure all of that was part of the equation that ultimately led Paul Rothrock to say, I'm staying home.
Yeah. And so I was able to do a little bit more digging and it sounds like whether or not he got formal offers or not, I'm not going to get into like a contest over that with some other reporting out there.
Yes.
I think there has been interest. There was very much interest in him. And I think the three teams you identified are probably the three of the teams that showed interest. And my understanding is that they were telling him that they could meet his valuation, that they could probably offer him close to max money. But the difference, like one of the things I think that became apparent were two things. One is, look, I'm not a big fan of the lack of income tax in Washington. Not going to get on a political soapbox over it, but I will admit that I think it helps in this case because it shrinks the gap where the Sounders can offer a little less money, and it's a 13% difference than what you would essentially be taking home in some place like California, where they do have a state income tax. So that's one factor. But then beyond that, I think there was a recognition from Rothrock, and I would love to talk to him at some point and get his thoughts on this. But this is a little bit more of a guess, but my suspicion is that he understood that in Seattle, he is effectively a star, whether or not he's the star player on the team. He gets the attention. He is sort of a spokesperson. He gets a lot of shine. He gets, he in the community, people respect him and know who he is. Whereas I don't think you can assume any of that stuff outside of Seattle. And here's a player who, he went to college at Notre Dame, found out he didn't really like it there. He transfers to Georgetown. He got to experience what it was like in DC. He gets drafted by Toronto. He goes there. He experiences what that's like. And then he comes back to Seattle. And I think that experience of leaving home and coming back really did help inform the decision to return to the Sounders, because he knew it wasn't, he knows that the grass isn't always greener and that there's considerations beyond just money. Now, and especially if the money's close enough where it doesn't make that much of a difference. I just think that this is, I think he deserves some credit for exploring his options and ultimately deciding that the Sounders were still where he wanted to be.
Absolutely agree. And going back to the whole offers or not, I mean, it's always funny to me because, as someone who's getting that back end story, you're just careful with it because it's very simple for me to be like, Jeremiah, I want you to leave Sunder Hart, although you're the owner, and I want you to come work for Pool. So how much is it going to take to, have you just fly and leave that ship? That is a negotiation as it is, right? But people when they phrase it to me, I use the same words, just being careful, but I'm with you. There were clearly offers. There was clearly an interest well enough for the coaches to be involved, for real numbers to be thrown out. So all of that to say, yes, I am more than happy for Paul himself that he gave himself that experience and that self-validation to say, I am attractive to a lot of teams. I did bet on myself and say, hey, let me just see what's out there. And ultimately, I made the decision to stay with no regrets and no, I don't know, what would you call it? Feeling like I had to come back with my tail between my legs, nothing like that. There seems to be no issue with him just saying, look, I looked, I checked it out, and I ultimately wanted to stay home, right? So I feel like that's the way it should be written rather than maybe he didn't get what he wanted and he had to settle for Seattle. Right. I think that he made a conscious decision to stay in a place where he's going to be an influential player.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's, so I think that's an interesting thing. And what else I find interesting is that this feels like this week has sort of flipped on its head the narrative around the Sounders offseason, which very quickly went from, man, all we've done is lose Danny Leyva to, oh, we are bringing back some of my favorite players. And, oh, we also added Hassani Dotson and a couple other players. Now, these are not necessarily the big splashy, high profile moves that I think a certain segment of the fan base justifiably would like to see happen, but they are the kind of moves that smart teams make that build a foundation and that keep you achieving at a high level. Like I'm sorry. I love Danny Leyva. I love João Paulo, but there's no way that you can convince me that Hassani Dotson is not an upgrade over those players what they were at least last year. Now, Danny Leyva maybe has a higher upside, and I think that's a fair point. But in terms of what the Sounders got out of those two players last year, I have very little doubt that Hassani Dotson should be able to provide more than that.
Right. And although I have shared my concerns in regards to Hassani's profile as a midfielder to not necessarily give you some of the things that you lost in a Danny Leyva or some of the things that were so effective by Ovid Vargas that you and I have talked about, having those pivots that can do different things and how valuable that was last season. I do think that considering the budget, considering what's out there, this is a good move. We'll talk about how much it might cost the team, and you might have different opinions on whether that lessens whether this is a good move or not. But ultimately, I feel like the team is making strides to make the team better, knowing that those top positions, those areas of the salary that are taking the biggest parts, the DPs, the TAM players, those are set. Those are done. Those are the ones that you're hoping that can elevate the level of your team, the Jordan Morrises, the Rusnacks, and of course the Pedro de la Vegas. Look, and I hear people already cringing at me saying these names because there's the Albert Rusnak skeptics that they don't want to see anything about Albert Rusnak being a DP, and then the Pedro de la Vega clearly injury situation. But you're hoping that by keeping a guy like Rothrock, you are keeping that floor high and you're building on a successful 2025 season going into 2026 and waiting for Pedro to come back from what it seems to be a very rehabable, is that a word? It's not.
Sure.
But an injury that you should come back from not quickly, but it shouldn't be an issue like a ligament or anything like that. So I do believe that the roster is being constructed adequately, and all these little pieces, all these players that are being added are just additions to just build the rest of the roster.
Right. And I think bringing Rothrock back also gives you some security, because otherwise you are relying a lot on Georgie Manungu and or Paul Arriola sort of having big seasons. And I think this puts both of those players in a position where what you get out of them is a bonus. Manungu is an interesting one, though, because I do think there is room for him to really explode if he can get some minutes. But, there's still holes in his game. And there's, I think it's good to have competition at those spots. But it does feel like the winger position is pretty settled at this point. But I wouldn't close the door on the Sounders making. I still think they're out there looking for a U22 striker. It will be interesting.
Should.
Right. And I think it makes sense. And I think a lot of that, I think whether or not the Sounders make another big move, I think probably hinges on a few things. One of them is whether or not they can get a U22. But the other part of it is if they can move out someone who I don't know, like Obed Vargas. I think we've talked about this. The Sounders still think there's a chance that they can move Obed Vargas, and that they can basically collect they have about $2.3 million of available GAM that they can still bring in, because they got about 700,000 from Danny Leyva. And so I think their attitude is, look, any cash, any GAM we can get, any cash we can get from that above the 2.3 million is sort of a bonus. But that obviously gives them a lot more flexibility to do stuff under the cap if they were to get 2.3 million for Obed Vargas. And then, of course, there's a possibility that they could trade Danny Musovsky or a Nuhu or someone like that, where they sort of replenish their GAM budget. But aside from a U22 forward, I don't know that the Sounders feel like there is an obvious area for need, again, barring moving one of these other players.
Correct. So let's talk about something that's very relatable and goes with everything you just said. First of all, I totally agree with you that Georgie Manungu is going to be a very interesting player coming into 2026. Ultimately, I can't sit here and guarantee you that Paul Rothrock is going to be a starter right off the bat. I mean, he clearly has an edge, and he's leading that spot as of right now over Arriola, I would think, and over Georgie Manungu. But we'll see what happens in the preseason, and we'll see how players perform, because I have seen a Georgie Manungu that seems determined to go into the 2026 season with all cylinders rolling. He's getting fit. He's working out. He seems to be a guy that's going to come in just on fire. And we both know that his potential, his ceiling is high because of his one-on-one, 1v1 abilities, everything he was able to do last season. He's such a difficult player to defend. He stretches out defenses. He gets to that end line very consistently. He's a different type of winger than Paul is. And that's good for the Sounders, having different weapons on that side. But I do feel like there's going to be variations to the best starting 11 next season. And people might not love that, but I think that worked this season, right? Yeah. I felt like having different combinations and having versatility, almost interchangeable players at positions in that attacking end, ultimately resulted in 68 goal season. And you probably want to build on that. So all of it to say that if there's one area that I want you to give me your 2 cents on, and we already had Jeff's opinion, and I take that opinion very highly because he knows Dotson. But do you have any doubt that if both you and I seem pretty confident, or we feel like that it's very likely that Obed is gone at the beginning of the year, that Dotson is the guy that's going to be slotted into that position. And I say that because I think that's obvious. I think that Dotson's going to be the guy that's going to be next to Christian Roldan, whether or not they're similar players or whether or not Dotson, as of what we have seen so far, doesn't have those other attributes. You don't go and get a guy like Dotson that you've wanted for a long time to not start him, right? Or to not make him be a guy that if Obed is gone, he's the next guy that takes that role. And I want to add that, in my opinion, everything that I had heard about Dotson talking to other teams and being a guy that was a desirable free agent was that he was asking for a max contract or max money. Although we don't have the official number, I would venture to say that his salary is likely in the 800s. So if you're spending that much money to have a guy here, you're almost certainly saying, we're going to try to sell Obed with everything that we could possibly do to get him the right scenario, the right team, the right situation for both club and team. And then Dotson is my guy. That seems pretty squared away, right? It feels like that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you there that the reason you signed Hassani Dotson is because you think he is a starting caliber player. Whether or not Obed is here, that's a separate, if Obed's here, that'll be an interesting competition. I think, and I do think it's a competition. I don't think the Sounders brought in Hassani Dotson to be like the old hand who just sort of like keeps it locked down. I think they brought him in to compete at a high level. He's a 28-year-old midfielder who still feels like he's got a lot to offer in terms of high level play. I guarantee he did not come to the Sounders to sit on the bench. Like, that's not the pitch they made to Hassani Dotson. And I'll add, the Sounders have been really interested in bringing Dotson over basically ever since he made it clear that he wanted out of Minnesota when things weren't lining up with Minnesota United. The Sounders were among the teams that were trying to work out a trade. My understanding is they were actually trying to get him last summer. And originally it looked like he had originally been designated for the season-ending injury. And under that auspice, the Sounders thought that they could kind of get in early on the potential free agency and bring him in. It did not work out for a variety of reasons, but the Sounders have been pretty dogged in their pursuit of Dotson. Again, not the sign of a team who just wants him to be here to be, like this is not a Kellen Rose situation where they're sort of like bringing a player in because he's a local kid and he might be able to help with the, just with the locker room or something. No, they brought in Hassani Dotson to compete, to play minutes. And, whether, again, if Obed Vargas is still here, my assumption is that's going to be probably Obed Vargas's job, but it's going to be a lot of competition, and I think you're right. I think he's probably up close to the max salary for a free agent, which would have been right around 830. And again, that's another sign that they're not bringing him in just to be a guy on the roster, to a squad player.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart podcast network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible through our paid subscribers. Plans start as low as $30 a year and allow us to remain independent and mostly ad-free. Subscribers get access to all our written and podcast content, including a full-text RSS feed and a mostly ad-free podcast feed that includes every show in one spot. If you really like what we're doing, though, I'd encourage you to sign up at our higher tiers, which include all sorts of various perks. The most popular of those is our members-only Discord, where the real Sounders sickos hang out. I know I've called this group the smartest, funniest, and best-informed Sounders fans in the world, but it's more than the rough equivalent of a Sounders Mensa meeting. Discord is where we make things happen, like for real. You know the promotion the Sounders ran that offered fans the opportunity to trade in their Messi jersey for a Paul Rothrock one? That originated in our community. You'll not only be the first to know about stuff, but you also have a semi-direct line to the movers and shakers at the Sounders organization. If you want to be one of the totally normal people who occupy the Sounder at Heart Discord, just become a supporter of Sounder at Heart. Anyway, thanks for listening, and go Durs. No Sadietis, admittedly, is not exactly known for our spicy takes, but that doesn't mean we want our food to be mild. Spice up your life with Haxan Ferments. Handcrafted in Georgetown and made with the best local ingredients from across the Pacific Northwest, they specialize in unique small batch fermented hot sauces and vinegars. Haxan Ferments brings bold flavors and natural fermentation together for something truly special. Whether you're a heat seeker or just looking to elevate your cooking, you'll find something you love at haxanferments.com. That's HAXANFERMENTS.com. And right now, if you use the code SOUNDERATHEART, that's all one word, at checkout, you will get a free hot sauce with your order. Again, go to haxanferments.com, use the code SOUNDERATHEART at checkout for a free hot sauce with your order. Haxan Ferments is a proud sponsor of the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Does that make you feel like this is any lesser of a good move? You heard me talk about when I initially heard about it, if I thought that it was a depth move. I thought that it was a move that was decent, that I understood the versatility. I understood the combination of player that he is, the intangibles that he brings to the table that are very in line with what Brian and the club wants or desires in a player. But when he came to the salary, I felt like a lot of the fans and even while talking to other people more involved in the league, there was a sense that whether or not he was going to come to Seattle on some sort of like hometown discount, and that made it a better move because he was not going to ask for max money. And he knew that he was coming from a season where he was injured and he had 400 minutes. And so maybe he was looking to revitalize his career by having a lesser salary. That doesn't seem to be the case. So to me, it still feels like a decent move, but I feel like the value that you're paying definitely puts more pressure on what I expect that sort of salary to produce on the field. So I'm wondering what you feel about that.
I would say that obviously as a fan, you'd love him to be coming in on a hometown discount, and it would be better for the cap if he were coming in at some sort of discount. But I don't think it's a mistake to pay. We're talking about the difference of maybe on the high end, $200,000 of what we maybe thought he was going to be getting. And you can argue like, look, this is the difference between what the Sounders were offering Paul Rothrock and what Paul Rothrock wanted to. And so we can have a debate about playing hardball and doing all these types of things. But ultimately, it doesn't really bother me. Like if Dotson is at the level that he was at in 2024, I think that's a bargain. At that point, he was one of the top central, two-way midfielders in the league. I think if that's the player you're getting, you're not really too worried about $150,000, $200,000 here and there. And I think the other thing about this, and which I can't really escape from, and I think this factored into the Paul Rothrock negotiations too, is that we have 2026, and then there's this sprint season in 27, and then the full season in 27, 28. Sometime between now and then, the whole way that the money in MLS is structured is going to be blown up pretty considerably, I think, is where this is all heading. MLS is going to have to loosen the way that they spend money in order to take full advantage over this calendar shift. And I think that's a when, not if kind of proposition. And so that's where I think some of these, like, I'm not going to get too bogged down in the particular money. I can understand how it feels like less of a home run deal. And, it does feel different when you're bringing in a player like Dotson purely as depth versus someone who might be an important part of the team. But that's the thing is, like, I think Dotson potentially has a really good role to play on this team. And so it doesn't really bother me as much in the same way that with Rothrock, I'm okay overpaying him a little bit if it meant, because I think he can perform at that level. So, I mean, I get what you're saying. I don't don't really have any quibbles with what you're arguing there. I guess just personally, I'm not as worked up about it because it seems like the Sounders are still going to be able to do the things they feel like they have to do to put together a good roster.
Right. And now this is supposed to be a Paul Rothrock show. So I want to add a couple of things on Paul Rothrock. But before that, I mean, I looked at the free agent list for midfielders, and there was really nothing better than Dotson out there. You know, you had like Felipe Carballo, you had Christian Paredes,
Justin Hack.
You had, Justin Hack, but that one
was kind of a hybrid between a center back and a defensive midfielder. And I guess the Sounders did talk to Justin Hack as well. But ultimately, I think they felt like Dotson was a better fit for specifically what they wanted. But go on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's exactly where I was going to go. Justin Hack is a very good one. I just don't know if the system worked to accentuate and amplify what he does well. It's completely different of what he had in New York and what he could do elsewhere. Same thing as Gaston Bergman, a guy that's a lot older, that's had some injuries. There was nothing really out there. So I do give credit, and I'm always gonna give Craig and Sean the benefit of the doubt, because regardless of the criticism and valid criticism on my end to some of the situations there with the way Craig operates and things, him and Sean Henderson have brought in mainly players that have been effective. I mean, aside from Eber is the only one that I can really think of that he kind of missed on. But even, Danny ended up working out on the last. Danny Musowski ended up having a big year. I think that Ferreira was a phenomenal move. I think the Albert Rusnak thing has worked. I mean, I feel like the players that they've identified to come in and bring in and have them perform. I think Jonathan Bell was a very good player to come in and produce. So all of these players, so they get the benefit of the doubt on my end. I like to give them their due and deserve credit that they know these players a lot better than I do. I could have 1,000 opinions, but they're clearly way closer to it. And finally, anybody that, wrote or asked me about Andres Cubas or Sebastian Berhalter, it was just never going to happen. I would love to. Yeah. I would love for things to work like FIFA and say, sure, I'm not going to get Dotson. I'm going to, go ahead and get Andres Cubas. Absolutely. But, Paranaense is offering this guy like $5 million to get him out of Vancouver. So it was clearly something that was out of the cards for the Sounders. So considering what their realistic options were, I think it's fine. And I leave room to be surprised. And I would love that. I would love to have this expectation where it is and for Dotson to come in and perform at a higher level if that is the necessity of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, just to speak to Andres Cubas, the Sounders would have to, like, even in a world where the Sounders had $5 million to pay for Cubas's transfer, that he'd have to be a designated player. I don't really see how that is an upgrade over what you bring in Andres Cubas to put next to, I guess you put him next to Christian Roldan, and is he a better player than Dotson? Yeah, sure, absolutely. But
I would agree.
You have to make
the salary what you're paying this exactly so much more. Yeah, 100%.
Exactly. But yeah, so I mean, I'm feeling pretty good about where the Sounders roster is right now. We didn't really mention that they also signed Ryan Saylor, who was a center back with Miami. Ryan Saylor was a player who was at UW. He graduated in 2022. He helped take them to the national championship game, where he was a teammate with Kalani Kosa-Rienzi, as well as Dylan Tevez, as well as a whole bunch of other players who have been in and around the Sounders organization. He's a player the Sounders know very well. He was the number 9 pick in the draft. He played a lot. He actually played, like 1,500 minutes his rookie year. I believe that was with, why am I blanking on the coach at the time? That the guy who's at Portland right now.
Phil Neville.
Phil Neville, thank you. I was like, that wasn't even close to where my brain was. But then basically under Tata Martino and Javier Mascherano, he didn't play almost at all. But the Sounders have a lot of connections with the Miami front office. Obviously, Chris Henderson was there. And I guess Chris Henderson always had a high opinion of him. So they liked Ryan Saylor a lot. They bring him in effectively for free. He's going to, he'll probably make somewhere close to the league minimum. And he doesn't really hit the cap. And then they also picked up a guy named Max Anchor, who is a goalkeeper who was in the Whitecaps organization. He's a homegrown player, so he doesn't count as an international, and he doesn't count against the salary cap at all. So that's, again, you get a third goalkeeper who is effectively free. He's young. I think he's 21 or 22, and he has like 5,000 professional minutes. So he's gotten a lot of playing time, and I'm sure the Sounders just feel like he's a high upside type of gamble, and he's your third goalkeeper. So, but anyway, you get to have a third goalkeeper for free, essentially. And so the Sounders have really they've replaced John Bell. They've replaced Jacob Castro. We haven't even mentioned that they re-signed Stephen Fry, who is coming back probably about half of what he was paid last year. So that creates a little bit more flexibility. They bring back Paul Rothrock. All of a sudden, this roster that was starting to look a little thin, right back where we expected it to be.
Right. And I'm going to have to trust you and Craig and Sean when it comes to Ryan Saylor. I did my due diligence. I called a couple of guys that I trust that know that the scene at Inter Miami, and I got mixed reviews, specifically from the time with Tata and those that worked around Tata about him as a player. To me, I don't know. I don't know what the need was there. I think and we've said this before, I thought Tino Lopez was the guy that they wanted to look at.
Which could still happen, I suppose.
What happened with Leo Burney? I mean, I don't know how much. I know that he had a lot of injuries. He has a lot of injury concerns. He couldn't stay healthy, so maybe that's what it was. But a guy that has played, 40 plus games in 4 years. I mean, it happens, I guess, and the Sounders have done well. You mentioned this to me prior to us starting to record, is that John Bell was a situation where he didn't play a lot of minutes for St. Louis, but then he ended up being a really good player for the Sounders. Maybe that's where this lies, but it definitely doesn't excite you. I still think that the biggest move that they were able to do is getting Rothrock back, and that's very interesting.
It is kind of interesting, and it like I said, it's funny how bringing back Rothrock seems to sort of change the narrative a little bit, because I think people were getting in their feelings, understandably, about the idea that they were going to lose Paul Rothrock. Here's a player who the Sounders have hyped up a lot, who has endeared himself to this fan base, who feels like a local kid, who bleeds Sounders green. And the idea that he was going to walk away it hurt, I think, a lot of people. It was frustrating, and it felt like the Sounders dropped the ball on this one. And the fact that he is coming back sort of just changes the mood. The sun feels a little brighter, and the clouds have cleared a little bit. And that doesn't mean everything is perfect. The Sounders can still improve this roster. I just think that the sort of like the gun to their head of you need to get something done now has been put away, and they have a little bit more grace and a little bit more time to go out and do some things. And I think we can go into this break now feeling a little more settled with how things look.
Exactly. That's the way I would put it. I feel like I am back to zero, right? It felt like with the moves of Danny Leyva, JP retiring, or no longer being with the team, with the departure or potential departure of Rothrock, Ryan Kent's departure, it seemed like you were at a place where this team was good and they had a successful season, but now they lost all these players and we haven't really gotten anybody. Mm-hmm. I feel like with the additions that they made, now you see where that hole for a guy like Leyva and JP might be filled, and you feel better about the center mid position. Now with Rothrock back, like you said, the sun just feels a lot brighter because you do get that guy that has a very high floor that he's going to just be a handful. He's going to create havoc all day long, all game long. So it does make you feel a little bit better, but I wouldn't say that the roster has improved. I think it's it's up to the players to raise their level. And I think that's what the organization is betting on, that the Ferreiras are going to be better next season, that Jordan Moore is going to be healthy next season, that Albert Rusnak is going to continue to play as well as he has, that Pedro de la Vega is going to come in and pick up where he left off during his last game in New York when he got that injury, where you just thought, man, anytime Pedro's in, he is so good on the ball. He's so essential. He could create magic in any moment. So there are these pieces that I believe that the club is saying, as long as those players perform to the potential that they have, we're going to be all right. So in terms of the offseason, I think we're back to 0 degrees, right? We're right back where we started, right back where we left off.
I would totally agree with that. I think that's a good way of putting it. They have sort of gotten back to where they ended the season. And from here, they have the ability to go higher. Correct. But they have not. I don't think anyone can really look at this roster and say, oh, it's clearly better than it was last year. So we'll see. That's not the most exciting thing in the world. I get it. But I do feel good about where they are. I think this is, I think the Rothrock move was a good one. I think it also says some good things about where this organization is internally, like the way players see it and the way that this is still someplace that players want to be. And there are positive things going on here. So, good for the Sounders for getting the Rothrock deal across the line. I think they played it well. And, they didn't panic. They didn't go out there and start, ripping up ideas or whatever. So, I think those are good things. And hopefully,
and that's where, Craig's negotiation skills do come out on top, because you didn't concede and you didn't overpay for the player, and you felt like it was fair, and you waited and you played poker with a great poker for the entire time. And then you ended up winning the hand. So it's great. And I think both player and club win in this one, as I had mentioned. Yeah. So, it's a good situation for both. And now the fan base gets to be excited about having their guy back. I do think that the U22 striker is something that has to be a priority, as you mentioned. I simply want to see a guy come in that has the potential to be the next Jordan Morris, to take that torch. And that's not a knock on Osase. I think that he's a very good player. I just don't see him like that franchise guy necessarily. We don't need to talk about Danny Musovsky and the year he's going to be, or whether he's going to be here next year, but you just need that guy with the potential, with the high ceiling to just be the next guy in store. Hopefully the Sounders can get that Patrick Adjumant, you know what I mean? They get that sort of player that's going to come in and perform, whether it's via draft or whether it's with the U22. But that's what I want to see this team be able to really key on.
Yeah, I don't think there's no such thing as too much striker depth. Like you can't have too many good young options at striker. And because what you're doing is you're just sort of you're buying more throws of the dice. And I think that's exactly what the U22 is about. You don't need to sign a U22. Like I wish they would stop using this analogy of like, we need this U22 to come in and contribute right away. That should not be the standard that they're looking at. No. I don't know that that's really ultimately what they're really doing. I think they know that they're buying potential, and let's just be real. Like that's what they should be doing. Like they should be looking at getting someone with high upside. And as an aside, it is crazy to see how much money teams are throwing around at relatively unproven talent on this U22. Like there's a guy that I think it's Dallas is buying from the second division in Israel. And I'm in like some chat rooms with analysis types, and they're just like, is this just like a kickback to an agent or something? And it's like, you see these deals and I can see why the Sounders sometimes get a little frustrated, because it's like they see people spending dumb money and it just makes it harder for them to go out and spend smart money, I guess. But anyway.
Yeah. And obviously the intent is what people want to see. I feel like it's those optics that you always talk about, and you always use that word. I love that word. The optics that you're trying to get better there, right? I don't think anybody is expecting you to have the money to go get a Silvetti or a Diego Gomez or, even a Martinez from LAFC. I think you just want to be able to go and get a player that you could kind of see that there's potential, that there is an investment, and that you can develop into something that's interesting, and that you're using those mechanisms, right? I feel like leaving those open is another gripe that is understandable, that fans have. Why is this spot open when my team doesn't need it, right? That is kind of the optics that I'm talking about.
Absolutely. No, and I get it. And I hope people understand that we feel you. We also would like to see the Sounders be a bit more aggressive when it comes to using all the tools at their disposal. So hopefully that's something, they do sooner than later. But I think that's about what we got here. I don't want to tread on too much material that we've already tread on earlier this week. So Niko, thanks for hopping on here. We're going to continue to do these anytime there's, like we said, anytime there's news, we're still happy to get on and do these shows. So hopefully people are enjoying these sort of emergency podcasts.
Yeah, and add some insight. I mean, we're not just getting here and just reading off of a press release or anything. I feel like we are trying to provide insight on the players in the situation.
Absolutely.
On the vision of the team or where it could go, what it could mean. So, we sit here, we have debated, we throw our takes. It sounds like from all the comments that people are enjoying these. So I hope that that's the case. I do want to end on by sending a special message to Catherine K. It's Kevin K's mother, who she is a loyal listener, and I have been meaning for the last 5 or 4 shows to send her a message of just saying hello, and we appreciate her being a listener and someone that enjoys the content, because Kevin's such a great guy. I mean, he's just a phenomenal. We love Kevin, and when he told me his mom listened, I was like, man, I gotta be able to just send her a hello. Obviously more meaningful from Jeremiah, so Jeremiah, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, of course, we love Kevin. He's a good guy, and we always enjoy him telling us stories about his family listening. So thank you for doing that, Niko. I would have definitely. You're always good about that stuff. But all right, well, let's get out of here. Niko, thanks again for doing this. You're listening to No Saudi. I'm Jeremiah Shan, signing off for No Saudi Test, part of the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, and we will catch you next time.
Let's go, Sounders.